Hey guys, welcome back to more property drama stories. In this video, a company built over 30 homes on my own property without permission. This was completely illegal. Let's dive right into the video. So the first one starts like this. I am from Senegal, and if you don't know where Senegal is, it is a country in West Africa. I own a decently sized plot of land outside of the capital, Dakar. I inherited this land from my family, who have owned and maintained it for a while now. The area itself consists of mainly open land with one medium-sized house. I don't live there full-time, as I have my own residence in Dakar itself, but I come visit the land from time to time just to make sure that everything is going well. I also sometimes stay there when I want to get away from the city for a little bit, so I wanted to get my master's degree in French. If you don't know, let me brush you all up on a little history. Long story short, Senegal was a French colony up until the 1960s, when we gained independence. As such, a lot of the country speaks French. Now, you might be thinking, why are you getting a master's degree in French when the entire country speaks French? Well, in short, I wanted to be a French teacher. I spent 4 years getting my bachelor's in education, and now I'm gonna get a master's in French so that I'm able to teach the language. Unfortunately, I had to go out of the country in order to get my master's degree. I had to travel to Paris, which obviously makes sense if I want to get a degree in France. I would have to leave Senegal for 2 years. I had a friend though who could watch over my home in Dakar, but I couldn't spare anyone for the property outside the capital. Through a long series of connections, I managed to find a person from a village about 2 hours away that was willing to stay at the property for the 2 years that I would be gone. He was a friend of a friend of a friend, as I said, a long series of connections, and I trusted him enough to take care of the property. We exchanged phone numbers, and I instructed him to maintain the place and let me know if anything were to happen. I went on my plane trip feeling very at ease with everything, extremely excited to be learning French in its birthplace. I will save you all the details of my time in France, as this is not really what this story is about, but I have to gloat a little. I put too much work into that degree not to. I had a fun time in France, I worked very hard and graduated with a master's in French. Of course, however, I missed my home a lot. Most especially, I missed my friends, family and the delicious food we have in Senegal, so I was excited to come home. And by the way, Ripe stars, if you've never tried it before, food from West Africa is usually amazing. I'm a big fan. Anyway, I was excited to come home. I decided that I would go to the property first to check on what was going on and to relieve the caretaker of his duties. It was on the way to Dakar anyway. I expected the property to remain more or less the same as it had been when I left it. But when I got there, I was extremely surprised by what I saw. There were rows upon rows of houses, around 30 in total. Most were fully built, but others were still under construction. There were paved roads, lights and everything. I was immediately shocked. Essentially, in the time that I was gone, an entire neighborhood had been constructed on my land. I automatically contacted the caretaker. He apologized to me, explaining that right after I had left he had fallen seriously ill, leaving him bedridden for weeks. He was not able to contact me for some reason, and I suppose he didn't just return to the property after that, as it probably slipped his mind or something. Of course, I was angry that he had left without properly contacting me, but even more angry that whoever built it without my permission. I walked around my property a little bit trying to find anyone in charge. As I walked, I noticed that most of the houses were vacant. Clearly, the neighborhood was very new. I eventually stumbled upon a group of construction workers building a house. I approached a man in a white hard hat, the foreman, and asked him if he was in charge here. The man turned to me very annoyed and told me that I could not be here without permission, as it was private property and dangerous. I was so frustrated that I basically laughed in his face and told him that this was my property and therefore I had jurisdiction and every right to be there. I asked him once again if he was in charge, and he reluctantly answered that he actually was. I explained to him that I was the owner of the property on which he was building on and that I had been away on a trip. I told him that he had to stop construction now. Of course, as I had just come back from France, so I didn't have any of the necessary documents to prove my ownership of the property, with my suitcases I probably looked like a random tourist trying to stir up some trouble. In hindsight, I probably should have dropped off my things and retrieved the documents, but I was so angry that I was not really thinking. The foreman, of course, denied my claims and brought out documents that showed that the property had been sold to a development company, which, roughly translated, was called Censored Estates months ago. And yeah guys, to protect OP's identity here, because I'm not sure if he could be in danger or something, I simply censored the name of the company involved. And yeah, obviously I had not agreed to any of this, and I figured that the caretaker would not have either. Either something had happened while I was gone, perhaps a legitimate transfership of ownership, or the construction company was lying to me. Either way, I tried arguing with the foreman, but he kept cutting me off and threatened to call the police if I did not leave. Although I was frustrated, I decided that it would be better to lose the battle now so that I could win the war later on. I was already so tired and jet-lagged from my trip, so any more arguing would have probably drained me. After dropping off my things, I told my friend, the one who had been watching my residence in Dakar, about the entire situation. He told me to pursue legal action because there was, in his words, absolutely no way that my land could have been sold. After getting a good amount of sleep, I did just that. I contacted a lawyer and explained to him the entire situation. He agreed with me that something definitely was not right and told me to give him a few days in order to investigate the development company. I agreed and trusted him to help me through the process. Around 4 days later, he called me into his office and showed me what he found. Essentially, the development company was involved in many illegal workings. Censored Estates was suspected of exploiting legal loopholes and bribing officials in order to build their properties on any land they wanted, including land that should have been protected for environmental reasons. At the time, most of the evidence we found was all trying to be covered up by the company, probably a result of all their bribing. Though I'm not 100% sure that this is exactly what happened, my assumption was that the development company saw that no one was occupying the land my property encloses and decided to take it over, fabricating the sale by using a series of forged signatures and documents. My lawyer dug even deeper after that and showed me more things that he found, showing that the company did to others what they did to me as well. I've seen many small business owners or homeowners, for example, talking online about how the estate apparently bought the land when they never intended to sell in the first place. Clearly, this was an ongoing problem, and everybody who has tried going against the company has lost. However, I knew my lawyer's capabilities and I was not gonna let this company bully me out of my own inheritance. With that in mind, I filed a lawsuit against Censored Estates. I contacted the caretaker again. Although he was not present when the company started building on my land, I figured that he could be a useful witness in showing that both of us were absent and how the company could have taken advantage of that. That is how my lawyer wanted to play it. So basically, I also talked to some neighbors who lived across from the property. They said that they were shocked when the company started building, as they knew that I was gone and would have never sold the land without saying anything, so they agreed to make this known in court. When we were actually in court, the company tried to present their forged documents. Obviously, this initially swayed the judge in their favor. However, when my side began to testify, the truth became abundantly clear. The caretaker and I explained that we were both absent, which my lawyer used to point out the clear opportunity that this company took. My neighbors also testified that they saw the company started building around the second year that I was gone. We also countered the company's fake documents with my real ones, proving that I always owned the property and had never sold it to the company. Furthermore, my lawyer was able to get some of Censored Estates' other victims to testify. These people all expressed the same thing happening to them: the development company faking documents or taking advantage of certain situations so that they could monopolize the land. The company tried to argue that these people were liars or hired to testify against the company, but some additional investigations proved that, of course, my claims were all real. The case actually garnered some local attention, appearing on social media and exposing Censored Estates for the crooks that they actually were. Many people in the surrounding local areas were posting online about how Censored Estates was horrible for their selfish and abhorrent actions. There was a lot of back and forth, but this pressure from the public caused the court to sway in my favor. Of course, I think Censored Estates would have been convicted either way for what they did, but the additional public pressure allowed me to get compensation for what happened. The judge not only recognized that the property belonged to me, but also ordered the company to demolish all of the houses they had built and reimburse me for damages, as well as pay me for emotional distress. What really rubbed salt in the wound for censored estates is that they would not be compensated for the money they spent illegally building on my property, meaning they had lost revenue. That's not all though. A month after the case had been won, I checked the news to see that the CEO of censored estates and several other officials who were involved in their schemes were facing criminal charges for what they did. Apparently, the case earned so much attention and public pressure that the local authorities decided to investigate the company, exposing and confirming that the company had been using many illegal tactics to get land for their estates. The best thing of all was that all of their illegally built estates were getting demolished and that the land was returning to their rightful owners. Because I had a lot of extra money from winning the case, I decided to build a newer, bigger house on the property focused on sustainability and eco-friendliness. The reason why I decided to do this was because there are way too many companies like censored estates everywhere trying to capitalize on protected land. Although I'm not a devout environmentalist, I still very much care about the future of our planet and I wanted to do something of my own in order to protect against these actions. I was really happy that I was able to do some good for my area and win back my land. And yeah guys, if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel because it would be very much appreciated. The next one is titled Make Me Stay Late for Not Being 15 minutes Early? I will show you how early I can be. So I work at a casino as a dealer. We have a first in first out way of scheduling dealers. If you start at 7 PM, you get to leave before people that started at 8 PM when they are able to close tables down and send you home. Pretty normal and straightforward. If more than one person starts at the same time, then who gets the option to leave first is assigned on a rotating basis. So if you have the first option, 1 week you will be second the following, the third after that, and then back to one. So one afternoon, I was reporting to work with 2 other dealers all set to start at the same time. I was looking forward to a short evening as I was the first option and I had plans after work. I arrived 10 minutes before my shift and noticed on one of the dealers who was starting at my start time was already dealing. They, the dealer, must have been in the EDR and the pencil needed a dealer to start right away. I confirmed that they had started 15 minutes before their scheduled time and they were the third option. Fast forward 6 hours and we had tables we could start closing. I'm stoked to get out of there when I look over though and see the dealer that started early leaving before me. I pointed out that I was supposed to be leaving before her and she gave me a crap-eating grin and said, "Well, I started before you, so I have the first option." And then she just walked off all smug. I was super pissed and said something to the supervisor. He shrugged me off and said, "It's policy. First to start leaves first? Okay then, game on." I knew this coworker had kids and had to wait for her mom to come over to babysit before she could leave for work, so she was not always early for her shift. I have no kids or obligations, so I started showing up 2 hours before my shift and just started chilling in the EDR. I would let the supervisor know that I was there in case they needed me to start early, which they always did because they would not refuse to open a table for a lack of staff knowing I was on property and available to work. 3 weeks of this and I had held the first option on every shift I worked. The dealer who was all smug about starting early was getting frustrated and angry at me. Having to stay super late every night was wearing her down. "It would be nice to get off before closing just once," she said to me once as I was leaving early yet again. I told her I was just following policy and she was welcome to show up early to make sure she was always first out. 2 more weeks and many complaints to the boss later, the policy was changed. Now, in order to jump option numbers, you have to be called in over an hour before your scheduled time. 15 minutes was not gonna cut it anymore if you wanted to leave early. I hope that it was worth it for her staying until near closing for over a month over that 15 minutes. I'm petty and I have a lot of free time. Either way, the next one is a revenge story. This one was posted by user commercial@6690 on r/ripe stories, which is our own subreddit. So way back in 1972, my dad and I were on our way to a lake to do some bass fishing at a resort lake town in East Texas. As you entered the city limits was a posted speed sign of 30 miles per hour. My dad was driving 30 miles per hour on the money as we entered the lower speed zone. We were pulled over less than 100 feet upon passing the sign. The cop came back and asked if we knew how fast we were going and if we saw the sign as we entered. Dad said, "Yes, officer, I did, and I was doing exactly 30. The officer said, "No, sir, you were speeding," and showed my dad the radar gun, and the speed indicated that we were going 30.17 miles per hour. My dad was rather pissed at this and said, "Well, I don't have a speedometer that registers in .mph, so how was I supposed to know that I was .17 over the limit?" The cop simply told Dad, "You could have just as easy gone .17 miles under as over." We had to go to the courthouse and go before a judge to pay a stupid speeding ticket. As my dad pleaded not guilty, Dad started some talk with the judge. Asking if he did much fishing in the local lake, it was the one thing the judge loved to do. So they chatted about 15 minutes before my dad told him that he was sent to this town to review the resort for one of the biggest fishing magazines of the time. My dad then paid the fine and said goodbye and have a good day. So then we did our tour of several lakeside resorts, fishing guides and the town in general, and the reviews for the most part was very positive, but it blasted the local law enforcement for the speed traps to catch the non-resident people coming through town, stating how he was ticketed for not even being a full 1 mile per hour over the speed limit and how the court system upheld such minor infractions with inflated fines. And by the way, Ripe stars, I'm curious, is that still a thing nowadays? That you can get fined even if you are just 1 mile per hour over the speed limit? Where I'm from, there's always a sort of tolerance. I'm not sure how much it is in miles per hour, since where I'm from it's kilometers per hour. But in general, there's like a tolerance of maybe plus minus 4 or 5 kilometers per hour, which I suppose might be 3 miles per hour. Anyway, let me know how it is for you where you are from. Anyway, and his overall recommendation was to avoid this town and stay on the main highway until they reached the next town over. That had almost as good fishing accommodations. There was a bit of a fallout after the article was published. The mayor of the town contacted the magazine asking for them to publish a retraction of the article because a week after it came out tourism and fishing had dropped substantially for being peak season. The magazine referred them to contact the author of the article to see he would be willing to make a retraction on his review. Dad simply told him if they were not able to make enough from all the business generated by sportsmen, then they deserved what they got for being so greedy and corrupt. My dad did give him a way out though. He said you can retrain the law officer and ask the judge to put in writing that he will retire at the next election. Then I will give the town the good rating it deserves. He only got half of what he asked for. They fired the cop, but the judge was scared enough to start doing his job. My dad kept his word and told the readers the issue of the speed traps had been resolved by the mayor and to please enjoy all the amenities the town had to offer. And the next one is an entitled people story, and if you have enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post a comment because that would help me tremendously. This story about an entitled train Karen was posted by user aggravatingbench41 on r/ripe stories. So this happened a year ago and sharing it would be interesting. So for some background, in a previous post I stated how I work with coyotes, which is true, but when I am not working with wild animals, I lend my services out of state for a Pennsylvanian regional railroad known as the Reading Blue Mountain and Northern as a brakeman/fireman. Now, how was I able to do this? I was 18 at the time. Well, I have connections there with the president and founder of the railroad, so I spent most of 2022 working part-time for the Iron Horse Rambles with Reading 2102 and the most notable, the Iron Horse Rambles double heater with Reading 425, locally known as the Blue Beauty. Also, just for common knowledge, steam locomotives run with 4 crew members: the engineer, the fireman, the brakeman and the conductor. The brakeman often works as a secondary fireman to let the main fireman rest, but the brakeman and conductor work as seekers to help let the engineer know what is ahead. With all of that out of the way, let me wind the clock back to September 20, 2022. For the most part, the doubleheader went smoothly. I was assigned to work on the 425 steam engine, and the run itself is about a 2.5-hour round trip each way. However, it's anything but relaxing, but the joy you get as you roar through towns and get the attention of rail fans is indescribable. So the ride up to the terminating station was smooth sailing, and I go through the safety procedures to get the train turned around so both engines could reverse into the station. Note that the train consisted of 20 passenger cars, so it took a good while, but eventually the train stops at the station, so the 2102 and 425 could uncouple and be on temporary display and open for cab tours. I was in charge of giving the tours on the 425, and for the most part every rail fan was super happy to see me, and I allowed them to ring the bell and blow the whistle until Karen and her demon-spawned child climb up into the cab. As usual, I was being my polite self and giving details and stats about the engine. I then told them the top speed of the engine when it was built, how it came into ownership of the Reading and Northern, and how this engine was due for a boiler inspection. I was about to allow her kid to blow the whistle until I looked at the pressure gauge and it read 200 psi. It needed to be around 240. So I grabbed the shovel and politely asked the mother to give me a second so I could shovel the coal, and just as I step on the lever that opens the firebox door, and as I shovel away, I noticed the kid reaching his hand out towards the open firebox. Instantly my protective sibling side came out. Me, what on earth do you think you're doing? Do you know how dangerous that can be? Child, Mommy, that man won't let me touch the boiler. Karen, excuse me sir, why won't you let my angel touch? The Karen stopped, shocked to see me covered in soot. Me, is there a problem? Karen, you're just a teenager. How the hell did a filthy N-word teen like you get to drive this engine? I don't think you're old enough to operate it. Me, ma'am, I'm of the legal age to work in the cab, but I'm also obligated to ensure the safety of those who tour it. Your son could have received third-degree burns from touching the metal on the boiler. So for that reason, please leave before you are charged with trespassing on railroad property. The Karen shrieked, "No, you're the one who's trespassing. Now get off!" The Karen grabbed me by my overall and tries to throw me out of the cab. Now I gripped the railing on the outside, because if she had succeeded, I would have fallen 15 feet on my back onto a railroad track rail, which would cause serious injury to me. Luckily, my saving grace would be that the local tourist train was just returning and police were called onto the scene, and the Karen was arrested and charged with battery and assault. All the while the kid was crying, but he eventually calmed down and apologized for causing a whole problem and that he should have known better. After that, I asked the kid if he had someone else besides his mom, and he said that his dad was waiting for him and his mom back in the place the trip started. So after speaking with the crew members who collectively agreed to forgive the kid, we wanted to cheer him up, so we called the dad and filled him in on the situation. And he said that he would be on his way, but we assured him that he can stay there and that his son did not know any better, so for the return trip he was allowed to ride in the cab of 2102. The kid screamed out in excitement, and for the return trip he was laughing out of joy. And once we got to the shops to uncouple the engine, the kid met up with his dad and both of them had to drive up to the town where the kid's mom was arrested. I did not press charges since technically I was a volunteer, so I let the company deal with the whole situation. And yeah, Ripe stars, I gotta say, props to OP. I could not have handled this situation as gracefully and calm as he did. Before we end the video, we will read a story from r/PettyRevenge. It is titled, "My date blew me off for not buying him sushi, so I got $400 omakase instead." So there was this event at a bar that I was planning to go to this weekend, and I asked this guy to be my date that night as I don't like being alone in crowded, unfamiliar places. At first he seemed quite enthusiastic as he messaged me a lot about it. One time he casually mentioned how expensive going out in NYC has become, which is true by the way. I went, "No worry, I will pick up the tab and we will have a good time." I genuinely didn't think of it as a big deal, since I'm not the most frugal person in the world. Well, the night before our supposed date, I wanted to confirm everything and messaged him that, well, we can also grab something to eat beforehand. What kind of food do you like? He got back to me saying that there is a sushi place in Queens he wants to try. Initially, I was struck this being bizarre, as the bar is in the West Village, and if we do what he wants, I would have to forfeit most of the night to be in Queens. The only reason why we are even hanging out is because I wanted to go to this bar. So I made a logical response suggesting we could get something else near the bar. He became unresponsive. When I pressed for a confirmation from him for the itinerary, he said he needed to think about it. At this point I realized he really takes me for a meal ticket. He is trying to get me to accept his demands as it is already Friday night and I'm running out of options of people still free and available, which as a matter of fact I was. He really derailed my plan. And I pulled out my phone and booked myself a $400 17-course omakase at a very nice place in the village. I had a blast with the insanely delicious meal, and I posted the picture of the sushi to my Instagram stories. He messaged me later claiming he is sorry and he got busy with family blah blah blah. I blocked him immediately. And yeah guys, thank you so much for watching. Please post some star emojis in the comments and I will see you again tomorrow.